Hello and welcome to Newswire. Happy New Year to all our viewers from around the world who are watching as 2019 begins. The good news is that in the world today, extreme poverty is at its lowest level in recorded history. But it is expected to become increasingly concentrated in certain regions. We will talk more about that later in the show. What is not good is that a record number of people have been forcibly displaced from their homes to the tune of 68.5 million. Where is the world headed in 2019, especially in the most violent conflict zones of the world? We will be talking to our panel of experts who will be highlighting some of the key issues facing us today and how we can strive as a global community to continue pushing for a more positive, solution-based way out and more positive outcomes for the year 2019. Here, I would like to welcome our guest here from Kabul, Ms. Ile Ershad. She is also a significant important politician from the Afghan government. She's also chairing several committees on education and culture and religious affairs. Thank you for joining us here, taking out the time to speaking with us here on Newswire. Welcome to the show. Let me start right off the bat with you. The situation in Afghanistan, we want to explore more of what is going on in terms of education, especially in light of how the peace process has been escalating at the end of 2018. If you could give us a ground picture of what the situation is for Afghans living there in a war-torn country, seeing so much conflict in the region.
Good afternoon to you and to your viewers. Actually, in Afghanistan, after 40 years of war, peace is the main key to achieve our achievements and our goals. To start with education, 17 years ago, while Taliban were controlling the country, we had 0% girls in school, but right now we have, fortunately, 40% girls, and also in the parliament, we have 27% female member of parliament, and also in the government, almost 25% females are in high government positions. But it's not all. Actually, without peace, we cannot achieve much, and without peace, we cannot live like this. First of all, when a mother sends her child to school, she doesn't know if she can see her child alive. So that's why we have to concentrate on peace and on a situation where we can get that kind of peaceful Afghanistan so that we can achieve our goals. So that's why let's do not forget that 2018 was a terrible year for Afghanistan, and we lost a lot of civilians' life and also our soldiers, and it was full of attacks. And let me start by saying that Afghanistan war is not our war. It's a proxy war. It's powerful countries' war inside Afghanistan and neighbor countries' problems in war in Afghanistan. And the main issue was in 2017 and 2018, Taliban got more supporters. And let me tell countries and let me assure them, by supporting one terrorism or one terrorist group, you cannot defeat other terrorists. So there won't be any good in that terrorist. Thank God this year, America initiated an initiative, and let me thank Mr. Imran Khan, Prime Minister, who supported the idea. Peace talk is going on, and hopefully we will achieve within 3 months. We will start the first steps of peace, not that we can achieve, unfortunately, within 3 or 4 months.
Ms. Ile, Ms. Ela, you sound very optimistic that the peace talks are going in the right direction. It is much needed in a time of strife and warfare, in a lot of death tolls in 2018 that Afghanistan saw. But I'm interested to highlight one of the things that you mentioned, that the numbers for women and girls participating in school and in getting out in the job market has increased. And would you say this is an unprecedented increase that we've seen in 2018? And also, what are your concerns with Taliban, again, trying to come to terms with the Afghan government, with their demands not to, for the US to withdraw? But if they were hypothetically in the future an interim setup where Taliban were a key factor in the government, how would this affect education, if at all?
Well, let me tell you that Taliban's mentality has been changed. Like 17 years ago, when they were controlling Afghanistan, they would not allow a single girl to go to school. But right now, the mentality has been changed. And also, during the negotiation, we will mention our red lines. But because of war, 4 decades of war in Afghanistan, there is also one negative point. Although we have powerful people in politics, in justice office, in high court, but still even an Afghan woman could not achieve her Islamic rights according to Sharia. Forget about equality in other rights. But still, I don't want to say that I am especially or other women are 100% afraid of Taliban coming back. Of course, Taliban will come back with a different mentality, with different agenda, and of course, our government side and Afghanistan side will mention their red lines. So, although the direction of the peace negotiation didn't go well, especially when Taliban announced that they want U.S. troops to be withdrawn, and the second negative point was that they wanted to change the constitution and interim government. But we offered, as from Afghan side, if during the negotiation a ceasefire will happen, and of course, a changing of our constitution has a special process via our parliament, and it has a process. Without any process, we cannot change it. Although the direction of peace talk is not 100% positive, but we are hoping to achieve a positive results. So that's why I'm a little bit optimistic, and I want to be optimistic and a little bit happy that thank God that neighbor countries who tried to support and donate Taliban, right now they agreed on peace talk, and something is going to happen.
So stay with us, Ms. Ela, stay with us. I'll come back to you more on that. But let me welcome our guest here all the way from Paris joining us. He's an expert on Syria, a politician also. Mr. Yahya Al-Aridi, welcome to the show. Welcome to Newswire. 2018 has come to a bloody end for most of the conflict zones, all of the conflict zones, especially in the Middle East. And if we were to shed light and draw a parallel to what we just, you heard our guest talking about Afghanistan, to shed some light on the ground reality in Syria. Now, as peace talks continue, you were there in December 2017 as an opposition spokesperson. Your stance was very strong on how Syria backing out, the government backing out on those peace talks, refusing to meet you halfway was such an embarrassment to their ally Russia. Also, from 2017 December to now December 2018, how do you see the peace process unfolding for Syria?
Well, the situation in Syria is actually fluctuating, depending on the interests of those powers or those countries that are involved in the Syrian case. Due to the fact that the regime could not face its own people when they screamed for freedom, it had to use force. It had to use bullets by choice, not by force. No, it just selected to use force to suppress the scream and the call for freedom for the people. And in order to remain in power, it called several forces, military forces, militias, the militia of Hezbollah from Lebanon, Iranian militias and Revolutionary Guard. Later on, when they failed to keep the regime in power, it had to call on Russia, and Russia interfered. And there is the alliance headed by the United States and some other Arab countries to the north. There is Turkey with long borders with Syria, and everybody interfered in this situation. And the UN also passed certain resolutions concerned with finding a way to peace for Syria. These resolutions were not adhered to by the regime because it felt that the only solution it keeps it in power is a military one. We in the opposition called for a political solution, depending on the Geneva Communique of 2012. As you know, the conflict started in 2011. And also the other resolution 2254, which called for a peaceful solution in Syria. However, the regime didn't get into these talks, either in Geneva or in any other place.
What do you think, sorry to cut you here, but very quickly, the UN resolutions that the regime continued to ignore, not adhere to, even the Geneva Peace Convention that took place earlier. What do you think are the main roadblocks? And I want to plug in something that Ms. Irshad also said, that this in Afghanistan is a proxy war. If with that in mind, could you reflect on what were the roadblocks here in Syria?
What blocked the commitment or accepting the UN Security Council resolutions is the fact that the regime from the very beginning has selected an approach or a method or a way or a strategy to handle the situation of the uprise, the popular uprise. It said that either al-Assad remains in power or we turn the country into ruins. So that was a real problem, and the whole thing just went along this line. And later on, when Iran interfered, when Russia interfered, they supported this strategy of the regime. And that's why it has taken all this time, because the regime has been accumulating weapons for decades, because of the fact that part of Syria, the Golan Heights, was occupied by Israel. And those weapons were accumulated over the decades, unfortunately were used against the people when they uprose against the regime. So that was our problem. Now we need the intention, the will on the part of the UN so that the resolutions passed need to be implemented. And when they are implemented, there could be a way for finding a solution, starting with the formulation of a constitutional committee that could write a constitution that determines how the relationship between the governed and the governor and life could, or Syria could come back to life, to a way of finding a real solution for 8 years, which witnessed the destruction of almost half of the country, the displacement and uprooting of half of the population. There is still also around 500,000 people in the regime's jails. Many are being killed under torture by the regime. This is the tragedy which everybody is trying to ignore.
Right.
And there are certain countries which are trying to rehabilitate the regime, trying to start again the diplomatic relations with the regime. And we witnessed this recently in the past week by the United Arab Emirates, which is really something that encourages the regime to continue with this tragic approach to a situation where Syrian people do not deserve to be treated as such. A regime that has perpetrated all these crimes cannot be rehabilitated. That's the real problem that people are trying to ignore and trying to say well, nothing has happened. All
Right.
the things in the world have happened.
Right.
And in our situation, people are being displaced all
So,
over the
no,
world.
while this is going on, it is definitely a huge humanitarian crisis there with millions displaced, so many unemployed, the economy in ruins. But the understanding generally is that Assad's government, with the help of Russia and Iran, has regained control of most of the territory it had lost to rebel forces. Another major bone of contention that has been playing out in this proxy war in the region. Does this mean that the influence of secular militias, jihadists affiliated with Islamic State, Al-Qaeda and other extremist violent groups has decreased in the current scenario? If you could shed some light on that, please.
Well, from the very beginning, the extremists, or those the Sufis, whatever you call them, the Islamic groups, the military ones, were not in any way in the intention of the civil movement that took place. Actually, Daesh, ISIS, and Nusra, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, all these things were fabricated and contributed to by the regime and its supporters themselves, because the nature of the approach that was followed by the regime and those who support it is a military one. And the one that provides this escalation, this tension, are those groups. We did not want them to be there. We just, now, the issue is not a military one for us as civilians, as Syrians who are not in the military side, who do not prefer, who do not want the military aspect to be the dominant one. Now, the reoccupation or the control over a huge percentage of the Syrian geography shouldn't be the issue. The control came out of the help of the Iranian militias and the Russian Sukhois, jets that destroyed. And you heard Putin saying that in Syria we tried over 100 kinds of weapons.
Okay, this is something. Just hold on to that thought. This is something that, Mr. Irshad, you can relate to is happening in Afghanistan. As any country we have seen, third world country, marred with violence and war, there always seems to be a resurgence of militias cropping up. In Afghanistan alone, ISIS has such a strong presence and numbers are increasing as reports are coming out from coalition forces. How does this interfere in the peace process and in trying to bring Afghanistan to some kind of bringing stability in the region?
First of all, let's say all these terrorist groups, they has been created to achieve powerful countries' goals. Especially in Afghanistan, once the peace talks started, let's do not deny that countries who supported Taliban and who recognized Taliban government in Afghanistan, they started to negotiate the peace talk. Of course, let me say people who started the war and people who started supporting Taliban, now let them finish that support and let them achieve some peace talk. The problem is, like as our friend mentioned in Syria, I really don't know why other countries would care if Bashar Assad is in power or not. In their own country, violence against women happens, but they try to implement democracy somewhere else. And same here in Afghanistan. 40 years ago, when war started, it was against Russia, and all these Mujahideen and Muslim groups were against Russia. But right now, to see all this Mujahideen group and all these Muslim groups, especially Taliban, will be supported by Russia. So you will not find out why would they do something like this. But the problem is, all the countries, they want to have somehow, they want to be involved somehow in Afghanistan, because if you see the map of Afghanistan by geopolitical location of Afghanistan, it's in the center of Asia. And even our neighbor countries, even countries in the region, even powerful countries, they don't want Afghanistan to be safe. And that's why war is going to be here in Afghanistan for years and again, and even the name and,
so, Ms.
the
Ile, are
policy
you
of the
suggesting,
war
Ms.
has been
Ile,
changed.
while you've been optimistic about the peace talks, are you suggesting that as long as international, regional stakeholders are involved in this peace process, there really can't be an honest agenda in trying to bring peace to the region?
No, actually, the scenario is a little bit different. Some countries, they wanted Afghanistan to be in trouble, not a strong country, so that they can benefit the situation. But fortunately, the supporting of terrorism, Daesh and Taliban, because of supporting them, the war and the problem has been spread to other countries as well, to neighbor countries. Even China is worried, even Russia is worried about spreading terrorism in the region. So that's why right now they changed their mind a little bit, not 100% of course. They changed their mind, and it depends to our government in our country as well, to how can they use the situation, how can they manage this situation. It's not 100% other countries, but let me repeat it again, people who started war in Afghanistan, they can bring peace and they can help us. And although I told you I don't believe it 100%, but I am optimistic because of the results of all this supporting Taliban and Daesh, all terrorist groups. It caused the spreading of war, and other countries are worried as well, because explosion happens everywhere in Pakistan as well. And also to see Russia and their concern that some Daesh group, they crossed our border and they went to Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So that's why they changed the agenda of the war, and now they think that peaceful Afghanistan and defeating terrorism will be in the benefit of their own country. So that's why I'm a little bit optimistic.
Okay, so Mr. Yahya, you heard Ms. Ile's statement on what is going on in Afghanistan and how she feels about the regional players participating in these peace talks. Similarly, in Syria, the situation is very much the same as you commented. Now, if we are to talk about why have war in the first place, considering that the cost of war in itself is so high. The UN this year for 2019 has appealed for over $25 billion to help over 132 million people across the world, most of whom are situated in Syria and Yemen. Now, could you shed some light on the humanitarian assistance that is, if any, coming along the way in Syria, and how is this affecting the economy? How is it affecting the Syrians there and reviving the economy and creating jobs maybe? What is the situation like for people across the world to get an idea of how people are faring there?
Well, first of all, those who are in the military are the least to suffer. The main party that suffers in Syria and in other places where there is conflict are the civilians, the general population, which is paying the highest price. Just imagine with me a country, 23 million people, half of it is displaced, uprooted from their places because of bombardment of airplanes, to houses, to markets, to hospitals, to schools. I was saying that Putin bragged about testing over 100 kinds of weapons in Syria and saying to the world, because he wants to sell arms, that they prove to be very effective. This is shameful. This is one thing. Another thing, the UN, what can the UN do? The UN is made up of countries. Some of them are the powerful ones, and they have the say. However, there's a charter that controls the UN's behavior. It wants to help the population. It wants to help the civilians. However, it always needed to get permission to get to those besieged areas. And now we remember in Syria in the past 8 years now, the regime would bombard a certain area, besiege it by force, and there would be no way to get the food or to get milk or to get the basic needs for the population which was besieged. Then they get to you and they lift the siege and they say that we did compromise and we are doing great things. They didn't do any great thing. They besieged the area, they bombarded it, and they caused the people to flee, and the whole thing results in ethnic cleansing, in demographic change. This is what Syria is suffering from now, and at the same time there is the religious factor that was the outcome of these demographic changes. Now the UN could extend some sort of help, but to what extent, with all the conflicts in the world taking place, we feel that there is shortage, there is lack of interest on those powerful parties. It can turn its back, and nobody cares about the civilian population. And this is what matters.
And how real is the threat? How real is the threat? Like you said, this war's been going on for 8 years. Those children now hitting those teenagers now in their 20s, looking for jobs, without jobs. How susceptible are they to insurgent and extremist recruiters, and in a way creating more of a vicious cycle in terms of these groups flourishing in Syria?
This is a substantial issue that you are raising. The impact of such conflicts is not only on adults. Basically, we have children who haven't gone to school for 6 to 7 years. And this is a generation which didn't get any education. It's going to turn into a blind one. And it is excused to do whatever it does. And crime would go up, terrorism would go up. These things that they claim to be fighting would be doing just against that, would be doing exactly the same as they warned that they would be doing. Now, another thing, we have handicapped, the number of handicapped because of the war, because of bombardment, because of the use of barrel bombs. Can you believe that a barrel bomb is thrown on people full of TNT? This is what was happening in Syria, and people are handicapped. They lost their feet, they lost their legs, they lost their eyes, whatever. And this is a whole generation of around 1 million people who are incapable of doing anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hear you, Mr. Yahya. It is a very morbid picture, something that the international community seems to be very aloof about. And this is where I want to pull you in, Ms. Ile, very quickly as we are running out of time. The similar question that I asked Mr. Yahya, the lack of economy, the broken economy, the lack of security, basic rights for safety, for food, for clean drinking water, for education, making the community in Afghanistan susceptible to root for than those who give them some protection. And this is where extremism is blossoming. What is the situation in Afghanistan, if you could round it up, for the young Afghan men who are waiting to see some kind of reprieve from this war-torn conflict zone?
Let me say our first, second, and third choice will be peace, peace, and again peace. Without peace, we cannot do anything. And besides thinking about job and jobless young generation and education, this 40 years of war left us with a bunch of drug-addicted people, and as Mr. Yahya said, injured people, and especially mentally ill people. How we can deal with them? This is the main problem. In Afghanistan, we have 35 million population. Among 35 million, more than 3 million are drug addicted, and 50% out of them is women and girls, and especially school girls. This is all mentally ill people. This is the main problem. That's why we are seeking peace, and we will friendly and kindly request all the neighbor countries, powerful countries in the region and on the earth, to help us to defeat terrorism. Otherwise, terrorism will be spread to European country in America, and forget about neighbor countries. It will be spread, and it will create huge problems. So for us, again, peace is the key issue to be solved. After peace, I'm sure Afghan people are very brave, and they can achieve and they can help themselves by getting education, finding job, and what make us worry, just peace, and also a bunch of men mentally ill people and injured people and
Thank you
invalid
so
people.
much, Ms. Ile and Mr. Yaya. I want to thank you profusely for highlighting these key humanitarian issues that the world seems to be so aloof about, while we are struggling and at the same time celebrating successful rounds of peace talks for these conflict zones. Let's not forget the millions who are going to see a very different life as a result of different proxy wars playing out, as a result of regional powers trying to gain dominance in certain regions at the expense of innocent civilians. And with that, let me take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. You are watching Newswire, talking about what 2019 is going to look like for key conflict zone areas around the world. Let's talk a little about Kashmir and also Palestine, an ongoing crisis for decades. Millions of people are suffering. Thousands have been killed in these different wars that are taking place. Where is the international community? What role is the UN playing? All these questions posed to our panel of experts. Here, I'd like to welcome Mr. Wasim Khalid. He's a journalist who is going to talk about this with us. This is located in Srinagar. Welcome to the show. And also Mr. Mohammed Makram, who is a political analyst who will be talking about Palestine. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Khalid. At least 600 people have been killed in India-administrated Kashmir. Now, this includes small children, a small 9-month-old baby. I mean, there are endless examples of women, innocent civilians being killed in the name of self-defense by Indian forces, in the name of security raids. Can you give us a snapshot of what 2018 looked like, and where does the international community stand in recognizing this being one of the bloodiest wars, bloodiest years in Kashmir?
Yeah, this has been the bloodiest year in a decade in Kashmir. There were over, like as you said, like 600 people who got killed. Out of that, like 300 or 250 odd were civilians, and it included also those people who, those teenagers and those small kids who died while protecting the rebels trapped in cordon and search operation. Overall, the situation was very bad. Killings were unabated, and as you know, that this year. It was a year, the bloody year. So, as far as the international community is concerned, even though the Kashmir conflict or what is happening in Kashmir has been recognized by the report which was published by the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and it was widely covered in the Western press. But unfortunately, if we talk about the international community or the states, or the Western states, they have attained a criminal silence over this grave problem, which is in the subcontinent, and which is consuming lives on every day. This is what happened in the 2018.
So again, international community seems to be completely looking the other way, or busy in fighting their own wars, baby, and nothing is happening in this 7-decade-old conflict in Kashmir. And here I'd like to welcome you to give your input, Mr. Mohammed Makram. Also, what is happening in Gaza? What is happening in West Bank? Sorry, Mr. Makram, my apologies. What is happening in Gaza? What is happening in Palestine? The numbers of innocent civilians dying, children, and then those becoming handicapped, it continues to rise. And on the other hand, what we see, the Israel government continuing to pass discriminatory laws against Palestinians. If you could shed a little light on that factor, that maybe it is completely immune to, or maybe not even hearing any protests from the international community.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I would like to remind everybody that the Palestinian people is not only in Gaza Strip and the West Bank. About 60% of the Palestinian people is out of his homeland as refugees in Jordan, other Arab countries, also in the West. But to talk about Palestinians living in historical Palestine, they are divided into 3 sections. One, which live under Israeli occupation in what is known now as Israel. They are about 2 million people. Another 2 million people live in the West Bank, and the third million people, they are living in Gaza Strip. Since last March, Palestinian people indulged in the Great March of Return. And in that continuous march, people of Gaza Strip, they go to the fence almost every day, especially on Fridays. Up to now, Israeli snipers, they killed about 256 people just in Gaza Strip, which is, as I said, a very small place, about 360 square kilometers, not bigger than a university campus, for example. They also injured about 25,000 people. About hundreds of them, they have lost their limbs, like their arms, their legs. Just yesterday, Israeli snipers, they killed 2 boys. One of them was 150 meters away. So they target these people in the neck, somebody else in the abdomen. So they kill people on purpose. This is actually what we call state terrorism. In West Bank, the situation is not much better. They also target people. Sometimes they imprison people for a Facebook post. Many women, ladies, were actually imprisoned for about 2 months. People's homes were demolished. Now we're talking about maybe 3,000 structures were demolished just in this current year, in the 2018. So in general, the situation is not that bright, especially with the discrimination practiced by the American administration under Trump. The Trump administration did a lot of damage to the Palestinian cause, especially cut the aid to the UNRWA, which is the main agency for helping Palestinian people. They also recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, contrary to the international law.
But Mr. Makram, do you feel that the international organizations who have taken upon themselves to be the mediators, to be the peacekeepers of the world's conflict zones, have stepped up at all in 2018 when it comes to Gaza or it comes to the West Bank?
We have to remember that the whole Palestinian tragedy was initiated by the UN itself, which recognized Israel, which is a colonial entity on the land of Palestine. So part of our misery and tragedy, actually the main part, is started by these international organizations. Now we have been waiting for their resolutions and for their decisions and for their plans to solve the Palestinian issue for almost a century now, but nothing much changed. I think that if the OIC, if the Muslim countries, Arab countries, activists, free people around the world do not pressurize these organizations and interfere directly, the issue will never be resolved.
But also, why do you feel that the UN Security Council is not stepping up to its mandate? It's not stepping forward in solving this issue. Is it not as imperative, the lives lost in Palestine? And also, the Arab League summit is coming up later this year. What role can that play in trying to highlight the atrocities going on the ground?
I mean, many international leaders, including the Turkish president, they were calling to add more representatives to the Security Council, which is actually it's a closed club, and it represents mainly the interests of former colonialists and colonial powers. So to expect any solution from that entity would be actually out of question. We are trying our best, but unfortunately we are knocking at the wrong door. Regarding the Arabs and maybe also the OIC, everybody is busy with his own internal problems, even fighting with maybe the neighbors. Internal problem and instability in the Arab world and Muslim world is it leaves a very negative impact on the Palestinian issue.
Now, please stay with us. I want to come back and talk a little more about the systemic arrests of mothers in Palestine, Palestinian mothers. But let me come back to you, Mr. Wasim Khalid, just on the same note. In terms of the international community, why is there such an ominous silence? And especially with major summits planned for 2019, whether it's the G20 or the G7 or even the Arab League summit that is expected in Cairo, what are you hoping for? Are you optimistic that Kashmir is going to come to the table?
As far as this international community is concerned, as I already said, there is a criminal silence on their part, even though they are fully aware what is happening in Kashmir. Even though, I mean, it might be interesting for you, we have more civilian killings in Kashmir this year than Palestine. I mean, I'm not comparing it like, we were just, yesterday the media has reported here. The problem is, India is a very important partner, as a business partner, which is acting as also counterbalance, which is like also rising up as a counterbalance to China. So the West is silent, and whatever they have been allowed to do, they are doing it. I mean, all the repressive measures, and they get scot free. Nobody is talking, even though.
Why do you feel the West is so silent about this, especially in light of the Indian elections coming up earlier this year? So, in that sense, do you feel like it's the incumbent government vying for voters in winning voters' favor, or is it to just appease their Western allies?
No, it's what you have said, like India's internal politics and then diplomatic politics, the external politics. The external politics, which comprises of the international community, they are silent over this issue. As I said, all the Western press is mostly American. They are covering it. I mean, it has been covered more. Very well. That's why the foreign journalists have been banned to enter into Kashmir now. There was a order released by the Indian Home Ministry that no foreign journalists can travel to Kashmir now, and now they have to take some special permission. As far as the Indian politics is concerned, the right-wing Hindutva politics, or maybe in the Congress past, it has hinged upon Kashmir. Kashmir is an issue where the right-wing politics uses it to garner votes and get benefits out of it. As far as international communities come, like America, which is the sole superpower right now, I mean, they have their own business interests in India, and that is the European Union too has, and it's also acting. They feel that India can act as a policeman in the South Asia against China. So that might be the reason. But like the rapid geopolitical change which are taking place around now. In the form of CPEC and other things, it might lead to some kind of conflict resolution. But there is also a problem that such kind of geopolitical change also make the conflict worse. So
right, because it's sort of a realignment of alliances taking place as the geopolitical dynamics are shifting across the world. That we've seen that, but how does it pull in Kashmir, or how does it sideline Kashmir?
Yes, exactly. That, for example, the Indian state, which used to claim that the part of Kashmir, which was lying with the Pakistan, they never used to spoke it publicly, even though the maps and the constitution they accept it as a part of. But now you see them becoming more and more focused and more speaking about that and internationalizing that issue. So is the Indians are claiming some part of it lies with the China. So we believe that geopolitical change, which occur after every 70 or 80 years, this might lead to some kind of conflict resolution, or it can also, for the conflict can become worse. And we are just wait and watch. On the other hand, inside Kashmir, the situation is very bad. There is a brutal insurgency campaign which is going on. And just adding to this, like the target killing of the protesters, I was very, I mean, it has moved us. Like, we have lost a journalist this year. And then we also saw an 18-month-old girl who was blinded recently. Her name is Hibba Nisar. She's just 18 months old. So this year and the year previous to this, and from last 3 decades, the story is same, only the characters are changing.
And it's interesting because humanitarian rights groups around the world have continuously shunned pellet guns being used by Indian forces there. And even though the Indian Army has said they will phase it out, there doesn't seem to be any decrease in how they are attacking protesters, is there?
No, there has not been, and it is not going to end as such. They are now reaching a point where they are using their iron fist policy. But the thing is that people have also, who are the third generation or the fourth generation who are born in the conflict, they have become also resistant to the violence, from the state violence, and they think the violence is a part of now life.
So become immune to the violence. But very quickly, what does 2019 for Kashmir look like? Do you feel optimistic that maybe things are going to simmer down now?
No, it won't simmer down as such, but there might be some kind of tiring factor might be entering, but it's not visible as such. But as far as the killings and the bloodshed is there, it will continue. There will be no end to it. As far as protests are concerned, maybe there might be some fatigue for some brief time, which happens, and we have been watching, like, as my colleagues, he might be, like, there was a first Palestinian Intifada, and then the second came. And it's like it comes in bouts and breaks, but like the ground situation remains the same.
It's a very high price indeed to pay for tiring out. When many lives are being lost year after year. Thank you so much, Mr. Khalid, for giving us an insight of what's happening in Kashmir and what maybe 2019 will bring. And coming back to you, Mr. Makram, you wrote earlier, just recently actually, an article about how there was a systemic killing of Palestinian mothers going on by Israeli forces. If you could very quickly summarize that for us to give us a better understanding of the kind of atrocities Palestinian women are facing there.
Yeah, actually, the Palestinian women are looked at by the Israelis that they produce potential terrorists and future terrorists. So in that way, they are targeted by different ways, either by imprisoning them or disempowering them, sometimes preventing them from movement from one place to another. There are a lot of road blockades. Actually, about 300 of them, for example, in a very small place like the West Bank. So women can't go to universities, can't go to their work, can't go to their schools. So they are not free to earn their livelihood. Many of their husbands, sons, they are imprisoned. They are deprived of a decent life. Families actually are also dislocated. So we could imagine what happened when you just post on Facebook and you are imprisoned for that in the charge of enticement for 1 year. So we are having about maybe 300 ladies now in the Israeli jails. So it's a kind of police state in the West Bank. The occupation force is targeting not only men, they are also targeting the weaker side of society, children and women. This is, unfortunately, the situation in the West Bank.
And very quickly, if you were to give us your view of what 2019 looks like for Palestinians.
Palestinians are always optimistic. We are sure that we will defeat the occupation, no matter how long it stays there. So we will use all our resources, and our spirit is always high. We are definite that eventually we'll defeat Israel and we liberate our land.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Makram, speaking to us about the situation of Palestinians there. And this brings us to the end of the show. It doesn't really matter how many billions are poured into humanitarian aid pledges or appeals. This is something that the UN Humanitarian Aid Coordinator has said also by the end of 2018, where he said it doesn't matter how much money comes in, it's really addressing the core issues. And when will these core issues be addressed? We're hopeful about 2019, but we'll keep you up to date as the stories develop. That's all from me, Ayza Omar. You've been watching Newswire.